You will, I'll go ahead and I will do the roll call and get the meeting started and maybe temporary and go from there.
Sounds good. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, Miss, wait a second. Better turn on the mic. Yes, Miss Kane,
Here.
Mr. Rosenthal.
Here.
Mr. Montefiore.
Here.
Mr. Greco.
Yeah.
Mr. Mcombie.
Here.
Your solicitor, engineer, and manager are here. And if you want at this point, temporary secretary and chair, we will go from there.
I appoint, if it's acceptable to the rest of the board, I appoint Louis Rosenthal as the temporary chair and Paul Montefiore as temporary secretary.
Guess I'll second that. Or does it need to be voted on?
If you're all in agreement, I think you can just do that.
That's
and
great.
then you can-
Okay, there's consensus on that. So
Okay,
Louis,
okay. Shall we have the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The agenda has been circulated. And anybody would like to make a motion to accept the agenda for the evening?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Our first item, agenda item number 4 is election of officers. And I will place Maria Kane's name in nomination to be chair of the municipal authority.
Second.
Motion is seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, well, I will now turn the meeting over to the chair.
All right, and at this stage, I'd like to appoint as vice chair of the municipal authority, Louis Rosenthal. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And next, I'd like to appoint Louis, I'm sorry, Paul Montefiore as the secretary.
I would second that.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
And are there any appointments for treasurer? Louis?
I would make a nomination for Tom Greco to be treasurer, who served us very well on the finance subcommittee in the past year, and I think he's going to make a great treasurer.
I will certainly second that. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. All right, now we're moving on to the appointment of other officers, director of operations and assistant treasurer. We'll appoint,
Assistant secretary.
yeah, an assistant, I mean, the one who wears many hats, director of operations, assistant secretary, assistant treasurer. I'll
All in
appoint
one.
Stephen Nease.
I will second that
Absolutely.
nomination. And maybe, Mr. Chair, does it make sense for us to just go through all names?
You
and
know,
maybe
that's
do this as
probably
an
not a-
omnibus
You can do it
motion?
all as one if you wish.
That sounds like a great idea. Thank you, Louis, for that idea. Okay, Mr. Maddren as solicitor, I would appoint. Special counsel, I don't know who we've had in the past.
I think you would want to continue
With Frank
with
Catania?
Mr. Frank Catania.
Attorney Frank Catania as special counsel. And then Mcombie Engineering as authority engineer. Dave Porter is here in that capacity this evening. And our auditor,
Your
Last-
auditor, if you would choose to continue the same as Malley.
Malley. And I would also appoint as auditor Malley,
I think you skip conflict engineer.
conflict engineer. That's right. Who do we have
I
last?
think it's Catania.
It's
It's
Catania engineer.
Catania as well. Okay. Tanya for conflict engineer. And right to know officer is still Susan Willanen.
I think it's actually me, but Suzanne does all the work. If you want to appoint Suzanne, you can, but typically you just appoint me and then we do go from there.
Okay, so Stephen Nease as the right to know officer. Okay,
I will second that omnibus motion.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, aye. All right, next on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the December 19, 2022 meeting that was circulated to the members of the board in your packet.
Move
And I-
to approve the minutes of December 19th meeting.
Second.
Any questions or comments? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, next is the treasurer's report.
I would just quickly say that I'm continuing to work. I have not done December's report yet, which is not uncommon it's the end of the year. And so I'll work on getting that done over the next probably 30 days. So we're ready for the audit. But what I can tell you is things look to be on track of what we thought kind of in budgeting process. A couple areas are a little bit over, a couple areas are a little bit under, but that's typical where we are at this time of the year.
And is there a true up with either RHM or CDCA that?
Actually, RHM did have a true up. If you remember, we voted to pay for the RHM amount, and I think we received, we ended up paying about 100,000 less than we normally pay because of the true up. The true up for CDCA, I believe, usually comes a little later. If I remember right, I think about March of this year.
Right, and as we think about, and you just gave us some FYI information in the packet, but that true up, how do they do that true up if they're actually reading meters? And
So it is because they're actually reading meters and it's compared to the other RHM does it compared to the other municipalities.
okay,
Based on how much our flow is compared to either Tredyffrin, Radnor, Marple, Haverford. It would
but
wherever
it was a
that
big
falls.
number at the end of December. Everybody got, all the 6 municipalities got significant true down.
Yeah. And that's not uncommon for how they do. And one of the things they do is like, if all of a sudden you have a major problem in your community, they're ready to respond and they just go do it. We don't have to go back. We've already approved that fee. They've had a couple times where they've come out and helped us, and it's just part of what they do for us. And so it works out okay.
Okay.
Okay, all
But it's not uncommon.
right, so moving on to the engineer's report. Dave Porter, is there a report from you?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, authority members, for reappointing our firm for authority engineer for 2023. First, I want to start off with the Camelot service area project with regard to our access drive and electrical utility installation for the old Masters pump station. I did confirm with Kevin Ford at Ford Brothers Electric that they are able to mobilize within a 1 to 2 week time period. So when we give them the go ahead, they can be on site relatively quickly. They did ask that we just keep them apprised of developments along the way in case anything should push that schedule, which I obviously committed to. In addition to that, AP construction is also available if needed to do rough grading to assist Ford Brothers ahead of that electrical install. And in relation to that, Steve Nease and I met with the appraiser for valuation of that easement over the adjacent property. Last month, we were able to do a site visit with KBX Golden, our wastewater operator, at the various pump stations to go over the list of maintenance items. Of main concern was the old Masters pump station, obviously because of the duration that it's been sitting there. The motors and pumps turned flawlessly. We opened the pump station, took the covers off the motors, turned the belts and turned everything, and it moved without hindrance. We did have a representative from Gale Corporation, who is the Gorman-Rupp pump manufacturer's representative for this area, present during those operations. And he was satisfied with that maintenance operation as well. With regard to the other list, I'm working on getting information from our various vendors on whether those things either failed or have to be replaced in connection with the warranty period. Because we're probably 2 years into it now, some of that stuff may not be necessarily covered under warranty, but there is some other things that need to be finished in some of the pump stations that we may be able to kind of work something out with those contractors. The authorities, stream bank rescue.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Before we leave KBX,
Sure.
because we were also provided with a December sort of inspection report from KBX on their visiting some of the pump stations and doing some maintenance. For my edification, and I don't need this tonight, but I'd love for you somebody to maybe send it. I'd actually like to know what that schedule of, like they mentioned, quarterly well cleaning. What are the normal things that they do? Just as an FYI for maybe our benefit. The next thing is I noticed on what, and I think some of these are relatively young stations to have these VFDs failing. Are they the right VFDs? Those kinds of things. That's kind of a surprise for me. That was number two. Number three is there was a question on here when they recommended some repairs on 5 stations or components of 5 stations. How do you make that decision? Are we getting back to them? I noticed they had addressed this to the township's head of public works, who does a lot of this work too, but how do we get back to them and who's making the decision whether or not we do these things? Some of it they're asking, are these more or less warranty items or?
And I think that goes back to what Dave was saying. He's working through with the vendors to determine that. Once we know those answers, we'll get back with you as to what actions if they're under warranty and they're taken care of, we're obviously just going to go ahead and have it done.
Right.
If they're actually an action item that's going to require an expenditure on your part, that's not within what our normal kind of proceeds that we kind of know for the budget, then we will go ahead and bring it back to you and have you take action.
But things like quarterly well cleaning and estimates for, emergency repairs, we've already got those things baked in the budget.
Yes, that's correct.
Can I just ask a quick question on that? And with the quarterly cleaning, does that include prescribed maintenance on a quarterly basis?
It does, and that's actually done, some maintenance is actually done on a weekly basis, like they're out there and they're doing certain things, particularly software type of things, watching that and all that on those levels. But yes, they do all of the maintenance on the pump stations that are required. Some of it's, weekly, some of it's monthly, and some of it's on a quarterly or yearly basis.
Prescribed by the manufacturer.
But whatever's required, they're doing that.
We approve a contract with them annually.
So what we did is we brought them on, they're actually co-stars, and so we've been continuing just to use them. If you wish to replace them, you would give us direction and we would look for somebody different. I don't know many out there that do what they do as broadly as they do it, but I'm sure there are others out there.
They're doing work with RHM as well, right?
Excuse me?
They do work for RHM as well.
I'm not sure what they do for RHM. Some RHM has more of their own equipment and RHM does some of the same work they do. And so when RHM comes and does part of it on the SR2 side, because that's where RHM is, that's part of our contract with RHM. But there are times that we can't get a hold of RHM and KBX comes in and actually does the work. I think that's what you're referring to.
Anything else, Dave, with your report?
Not with regard to sewer project related. If there's no other questions from the authority, I'll move on.
Sure.
The authority's bank stabilization project at 314 Summit Avenue is wrapping up. We did receive a nice email from Nancy Mazzone, the property owner, that she was pleased with how professional the contractors were and how things have turned out. So my understanding is the contractor has gone through restoration on the site. And she's thrilled with how things have turned out. Actually, the contractor went above and beyond and worked with the property owner to do some additional things that she wanted to have done to accommodate her. So with that, the adjacent owner next to that project at 400 Summit called our office today and notified us there may be a property corner that's missing. It may have been a result of the construction activity. So we're looking into that. I probably will meet with him at some point this week to determine whether it was something construction related. Chapter 94 waste load management reports are due to the CDCA and to the RHM authorities. We typically get letters from them right around this time and ask to have our reports completed by like the third week in February. So we've reached out to, adjacent municipalities, Edgemont Township that discharges through Newtown to the CDCA system. We've requested their flow data. We've requested data from KBX Golden, and we're starting on compiling those reports to be submitted. Lastly, with regard to Ellis Preserve, we've gone back and forth several times with their legal counsel, with their engineers on various documents that need to be provided and that have been provided for dedication to sanitary sewer through Ellis so that they can move forward with their sewage planning exemption for one component of that project, as well as the additional components of sewage planning for planning module approvals. And I believe that's something else that we'll be getting into a little farther in the agenda. So with that, that concludes my engineer's report for this evening.
May I request that you had given us sort of a summary status report before each
Yes.
meeting? We could maybe get that again.
Yes,
That would be really
Absolutely.
helpful. It's a very helpful report.
sure.
If there's no further questions of the engineer, then we'll move on to the operation manager's report. Anything else, Steve?
I just had one real quick thing, just to let you know, we're going to, and kind of announce publicly, we're going to be having a meeting next Wednesday at 3 p.m. to meet with anybody that hasn't yet hooked up to the system, who's been kind of waiting on that pump station. Hopefully to give them kind of a timeline where we think we'll probably be, as well as, just kind of reassuring them where we are. The authority is kind of committed not to raising the tap-in fee until we get those folks on, or at least have the opportunity for those folks to get on. And so we just want them to hear that and then know where we're going. So that would be the only other thing that I would add. Madam Chair, I would also mention somehow we overlooked putting public comment on the agenda. I would recommend that you do that now prior to taking any of the further actions, because you haven't really taken any actions up to this point.
Absolutely. Couple members of the public I note are here. At this time, we'll take public comment for any agenda items only. And just state your name and your address, and then which agenda item you're speaking to.
Is the mic on? Is it turning red or green? Would you push the button? So hopefully it'll turn green.
Got it.
Thank you.
I'm Bob Young. I live at 114 Hunters Run. I'm the treasurer of the Hunters Run Homeowners Association. And I'm here, I guess, to address, I guess it's item 12.1. And I'm happy to wait until it comes up if you like.
No, I think it's okay. Why don't you just go ahead and give us your statement at this point?
Okay.
And then we'll, if we need to speak, to you again at that point, we'll let you know. But why don't you give us your position on the recommended, the staff recommended amount of $9,685.39 to be returned to Hunter's Run due to a leak? Why don't you tell us about that?
I assume you have the request.
Yes.
In front. Okay.
Yeah, and the board has received that and has had the opportunity to review it.
Okay. we receive bulk water from Aqua. And unfortunately, the builder had taken shortcuts in certain sections of the property when it was built. The underground PVC, apparently they just put the rocks, dirt and everything over the PVC. And over time, we get these pinholes, which develop into leaks. It's happened fairly regularly. Usually every year or two, we have leaks to repair. We recently have gone on to public sewer. I think it's been maybe close to 2 years, perhaps at this point. Prior to that, we had community septic. We have historical data from 2020. We keep track of our monthly water usage. And when we are leak-free, we hover around 250,000 gallons per month. In the fairly distant past, though, we have had months where we have used 1 million or more gallons of water per month with these leaks. Recently, we had 4 leaks to repair. The problem is the detection is 1 leak at a time is discovered, and we have to wait for the plumber to dig. And if the usage hasn't gone down, we have another, and we have to go through the whole process again. And it's become lengthy recently because the American Leak Detection Company are short-staffed. Plumber is short-staffed, so we're waiting, it seems. We did beg Aqua to put in a external meter that we can read as often as we like, so that we don't have to crawl down in the pit, which is usually half full of water. So we do take weekly readings so that we can discover leaks more quickly. So this is the second time that we've made a request. And as you see, there were 4 leaks, and we did submit to Mr. Bradley also photos and the reports to show that the water did not go through the sewer system. Once these 4 leaks were repaired, we were very happy that the usage in December went back to was 254,000 gallons, which is why I use that as a value to compare to request to make our request of $12,168. Mr. Bradley, he changed, well, he did a different calculation, which is normally would be okay, but he used the corresponding months in the previous year, but there was at least 1 leak, maybe 2 going on at that point. As you see in the previous year, none of those monthly figures were close to 254,000 gallons per month. So I'm just requesting that that we go back to the figure that we had requested, or that we perhaps accept the amount that Mr. Bradley has recommended, and maybe wait another 2 months or so. And if our usage has remained at the 250-ish thousand gallons per month, that we be able to go back to Mr. Bradley and the board for a revision at that point. So that's why I'm here.
Yep.
One-
Okay.
One other comment I'd like to make, and I don't know if this is even possible, but our usage varies because of the leaks. It's not like we have half of our community going to Florida, and water is not used, or suddenly someone is using more to water plants or whatever. And we're going to be here kind of often unless we do something major. The last estimate that we got in, especially this one section where many leaks have occurred, is close to $200,000 to redo that whole line. And of course, we have 6 such groups of townhouses where we would have to do that. And it's just prohibitive for us. So I was wondering if there's any possibility that the authority could look at our historical data and determine, we think around 250,000 gallons per month, whatever that figure might turn out to be, And maybe we could go on to a flat monthly the number of gallons to determine the sewer fee, so that when these leaks occur, we don't have to come back every time and request a difference or a refund.
I don't think that's gonna be a
I
possibility.
thought I'd ask anyway.
Obviously, we want to encourage you to, you know, revamp your system over there so that
Sure.
these leaks are not ongoing. We are gonna take it up, later in the agenda. And, but I would ask anybody at this point, if you have any specific questions regarding what he has said, or anything in the document that we were provided. Is it just the one page that we have
It's,
on the
yes, like
usage?
2.5.
2.5 pages. Okay,
And
I
I-
looked at that. My concern is that, you know, I don't think we have a good sense of what the average usage would be over there. You know, in light of, you know, the information that we've looked at so far. You know, because we don't really know what the activity level is over there and how many people go away during the summer. So, you know, are summer months accurate? Should they be averaged in? You know, I don't know, it's,
I can give you, if you want to have it, our last string of what we believe is leakless months, which
is
is,
that different than what we have?
yes, which is
Okay.
about a year's worth straight, if you'd like to have it.
And you believe each one of these months was leakless?
We believe, yes.
All right, we'll take that.
Who should I?
Yeah, you can bring it up here. It's okay.
So,
Thank you.
I don't have, any,
Okay, so minus that one.
I don't have any, questions for the HOA. I do have, concerns and comments that I'll reserve for when this agenda item comes up. I am fully sympathetic with the issue. And my comments will be about sort of managing the fiscal business of the authority and what have you. So I appreciate your patience and your communicating that. And maybe I'll save the rest of my comments for when we address it on the agenda.
Can, the 2019 figures that were given to us, what would you say the were you fully occupied at that point? All units occupied?
Yeah,
I know it's a
it may be
popular
a
place to live,
month
but-
when, you know, an owner is changing hands, but, we've never had at least during that time, we have not had any long vacancies in any of the units. And that, by the way, is the first time we came to the authority for a refund, which was granted, which is why I used the same spreadsheet. And I will, I will just comment that if Mr. Bradley's method were used for the first one, we would have had about $3,500 more in refund.
What is your projected time frame on repairing the system so that you're not gonna have ongoing leaks in the future?
I'm sorry,
When do you anticipate, at what point? I understand it's a very expensive undertaking. So, you know, just let me know truthfully, when do you anticipate being leak-free there by replacing all of these?
we would actually have to do a huge special assessment to get that done, which is why we've been repairing the leaks. And actually now, hopefully we can repair them more quickly. Our plumber seems to be doing larger sections than necessary. Recently, when he's doing the repairs, it's the same plumber each time. So, I mean, he knows us very well. But I can't imagine that we're gonna have a couple $100,000 to get this done, and that's just in one section. And the aqua, by the way, rarely, if ever, will give us anything back on the water that was lost, which is why we're trying to be proactive and take weekly readings so that we can discover this more quickly.
Okay, appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, moving on then. Any other public comment? I apologize.
No apologies necessary. Please come up. To the mic. Actually.
State your name and your address and then what item you're here to speak about.
Good evening. My name is Jim Waldenberger, 506 Park Hill Lane, Newtown Square. I am new business 12.3, asking the board to respectfully request that you accept my late second meter reading. And if you want to hear the excuse, I admit negligence on not turning it in on time, but in July, I was on vacation in Alaska and just completely missed the July 5th date. And then I turned it in late in October because normally what I do is when I submit my July, I set my calendar for the next due date for October. And obviously I missed that. So as a result, when I received the sewer bill for about $1,700, I reached out to Nease and I said, I'm sorry, I gave her the data that was missing. I paid the outstanding sewer bill just so I don't incur any additional fees or penalties. And I just asked the board to please consider the data that I have submitted, and hopefully that'll result in a refund of some sort relating to my sewer use, because I clearly did not use 157,000 gallons worth of water.
And we have all the meter readings for that.
Yes, you do.
Okay, I think.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Go right ahead.
I'm sorry, would the next go around in the normal meter reading, it would true up? Yes,
What-
or
What do you mean by true up?
would we ever catch up?
Typically not,
So that's
because
the part I'm
we
missing.
typically don't accept late meter readings. And so when we do that, because what we don't want to have happen is all of a sudden the authorities now writing a check to the homeowner because they haven't turned
Got it.
the second meter reading in for a year. And all of a sudden you now have meter readings that have gone on, no meter reading that had gone on, and you turn it in and it's greater than the amount that is owed. We don't want to be in the position of writing checks back.
I appreciate that. I mean, but the point being is that, again, it's on me for not turning in the information when I should have turned it in. I'm not gonna say that it's not on me, but on the other hand, if I didn't use the sewer that much, I shouldn't of course be paid, albeit my turning in the information late. But nevertheless, I appreciate the board considering the issue now. Be tonight.
Absolutely. Okay,
Thank you.
no problem. Okay. Next is item 9.1, consider approving the bills from 2022 on check register A dated January 17, 2023, totaling $58,549.74. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second from Paul, thank you. Any questions or comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Consider approving the bills from 2023 on check register A dated January 17, 2023, totaling $178,775. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Any second?
Second.
Second from Steve, thank you. Any questions or comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Consider ratifying the reoccurring bills paid on check register dated January 9, 2023, totaling $4,403.60. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, second from Steve. Any questions or comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, moving on to 10.1, consider approving the following payments from the bond associated with 537 Public Sewer Project. $226.87 to her Mcombie engineers for engineering work associated with the Ashford service area. $1,176.24 to her Mcombie engineers for engineering work associated with the Camelot service area. $110,089 to JOA Bradley for project completion at the Ashford service area. This is a reissuance, just so everybody knows, of the payment that was already approved on June 20, 2022. May I have a motion for those three items? I'll make the motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
A second from
Second.
Louis, thank you. Any questions or
I
comments
do.
about that?
Yeah, so, what happened to the payment to Bradley?
So you'll make.
I think Mike can speak to this.
Yeah.
Either
So-
way, go ahead.
So we issued this to J&B with a note in the memo that said final payment. They didn't deposit it because of that. We acknowledge that we owe this money. The issue is that they've claimed delay damages and they haven't really provided us the support we need to determine the accuracy of those claims. But this piece we owe. So my inclination is that we should issue it without the final payment on the memo. We know we owe it. We know we owe more probably. We just don't know what that might be. So I'd like to get this out of the way. I think it puts us in a better position if we need to litigate of showing good faith in our payments.
And so they've returned the item to us without,
It expired.
It expired.
Yeah.
We've confirmed it hasn't been cashed.
So what happened so because it's paid out of bond funds, and it's issued by the bank to make that payment, when it hadn't cleared after 6 months, there was two choices. They either reissue or they put it back into the construction account. Because we didn't feel like we could make that decision on our own, we put it back in the construction account. You would now be reissuing that check based on that. That's basically what's happening.
so they're not claiming the item was lost or anything else.
No,
They just
no.
want the notation
Hey,
taken off.
Their lawyer at the time asked me to waive the concept of accord and satisfaction, which means basically, what it sounds like, I guess. I didn't do it at the time because I didn't really understand the delay claim and that sort of thing. And just came sort of a stalemate and it sat stale. And, now we've got to a point where, they've initiated litigation through this press for writ of summons, which is basically a one-page document that says you've been sued. Usually you would do that to preserve a statute of limitations. I think they just did it as a muscle flexing exercise, but nonetheless, I think if we're gonna try to whether we're gonna try to wrap this up through negotiating and say, hey, we need more information on the delay claim, or whether we're gonna litigate it, I think we're just in a stronger position if we make this payment.
I couldn't agree more. All right, any other questions on that? All those in favor? Aye. Okay, moving on to new business. Consider approving a refund in the staff recommended amount of $9,685.39 to the Hunters Run HOA due to a water leak between June and November of 2022. I'm going to make the motion.
Madam Chair, before you start, I just want to state claim as the operations manager, I've not been involved in this one because I live in Hunters Run. And so I'm not going to make any comment, or any questions are asked, I probably won't answer them in that case. And so I just wanted to be clear up front on that.
Absolutely.
Before you make a motion, can I make an opening comment to the new business section?
Sure. Yeah, go right ahead.
So 12-1, 12-2, 12-3, 12-4, all are about some discrepancies and or inaccuracies and or difficult situations with respect to the way this authority bills and ultimately collects revenue that we use to maintain sewage conveyance systems in the township. So I have a number of concerns which I've expressed with somebody else who's made a claim for well over a year, long before I joined this authority. And we've asked them to come back with more information. So we base our budget on forecasted revenue. We set aside money to pay the bills that we owe to RHM and CDCA for usage, for flow, if you will. And we set aside money to pay the debt service on the bond, and we set aside money for repairs and maintenance, unforeseen incidents that happen, and that's normally what the authority does. So we typically have not really generated big reserves for things such as billing errors, credit losses, and a readjustment and for claims of errors. And by the way, I'm maybe prefacing my comments in a harsh way, but I'm not. I'm very sympathetic with the Hunters Run HOA, and somebody going away on vacation and not being able to get us an accurate meter reading, and so I'm torn, if you will, and my torn state will lead to maybe a recommendation for us to think about. We've got multiple ways of getting quote unquote usage information. We rely on Aqua for some, we rely on other people's self-reporting meters, and we have different allocation methods for other places. And I think we need to begin to think about a consistent way or a policy that the authority adopts that basically doesn't put us in this incident mitigation position all of the time. I would say if everybody came back with a leak and a late reading, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, and that's not my comments. At some point in time, we have to raise everybody's rates because we're going to need a reserve just in case, we decide we want to make those adjustments. And I'm not saying that the adjustments are necessarily wrong to do. We just don't have the resources to do that. And so I would challenge us to maybe think about it a little bit. I would actually challenge our professional staff, our operations manager, solicitor, and engineer to think about ways of doing this, because as we begin to think about saving some money for the future, we have an antiquated system on the east side of our service area. We're going to need more revenue. And I want to make sure, I think we should be making sure that the revenue that we collect from everybody isn't going to mitigate the developer who put in leaky pipes, or the fellow or gal who was on vacation. And those are really good reasons, but at some point in time, we're going to have to make that claim. Aqua doesn't care. They'll bill for water that leaks through anything. And I want to be sensitive to, our history but as we think about the future, I think we need to get smart about this a little bit and maybe learn from what other authorities do. I'm torn because, I get it, people are away for the summer, but all of a sudden water usage goes up, which doesn't make a lot of sense. That would be my opening comment on this.
If I can just, if we're looking at these collectively, perhaps we need to make a distinction between those requests for residences or groups of residences that have a meter, a second meter, because that does go towards, right? Hunters Run is not in that category. Am I right? Right. So, the second meter issue, I think I'm comfortable addressing it through, and I've worked with Steve on this week, making some recommended changes. I was going to wait until we got to it, but we're dealing with this collectively. So there's some notices that go out, and it's in effect serves as an agreement basically between those with the second meter. It is supported by a policy, I believe, as well. So I want that cleaned up, and I want our solicitor to take a look at that, so that it's made clear that if you don't submit it by a certain date, then you've waived the right to that. There's not enough language in there protecting the authority to support that kind of a claim should a homeowner,
Whatever the policy
So-
or a rule is,
Yeah.
at least then we can use it to forecast revenue, because my concern
So that would
is that
take
we have
care of
enough
your
revenue.
issue. So what I'm saying is that those, for the meter issues, that's where I'm going with that. And, you know, I think it makes sense to kind of, perhaps we deal with what's in front of us today with the understanding that moving forward, 2023, we are not going to have these types of issues because our language is going to be clear in this document that gets sent to the individuals with the second meters, that they understand it, you know, upon, you know, by virtue of their having a second meter, that it's got to be submitted by a certain time. Otherwise, you know, you're gonna, you know, it's gonna be based on your water use, period. So, okay, so anybody else with preliminary comments? I don't want anybody else to feel as though they. All right, so back to then 12.1, which is a different situation, which doesn't involve a second meter reading. It's a condominium, you know, an older condominium complex here in Newtown Square, that has these ongoing leaks that may never be fully resolved, certainly not in the next 5 years, let's say. So we're gonna have these leak issues ongoing, it appears. I've got a motion to refund this amount. Do I hear a second, and we can continue our discussion after it's seconded and on the floor? We're gonna follow Robert's rules.
I second that.
All right,
And who made the motion? I'm sorry.
Maria made.
I
Oh,
made.
you made the motion. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And Paul has seconded it. I now open it up to discussion, as I have a lot of questions and I don't know who wants to start, but please feel free. Lois, you're.
Right, so, and maybe some of my preface or opening, comments in the new business section are, I may, for fear of repeating myself, I'm gonna repeat myself just a little bit. I mean, the first of which is, you know, I want to be able to reconcile some of the numbers. You know, the recommended and then the proposed and then some of this new information. You know, just from a numbers perspective, I'd like to be able to take a little bit of time to reconcile that. Number one. Number two, I want to make sure that whatever decision we make as an authority is in light of potentially moving in a direction that you just outlined and some comments I made, and that we're not wanting to do this, but because we're not there yet, we'll just do this anyhow, because it's on the agenda. And I want to be a little bit more strategic on this. And I want to be fair to the HOA and to the other folks that have come in with this, but you know, I'm going to just repeat myself one more time. We have some fiscal responsibilities to the bondholders. And we have a debt service that comes out of that we service the debt coming out of funds that the authority bills for. And we're certainly not going to be able to say, hey, you know what, we just refunded X dollars of money, please defer our next quarter's bond payment. That'll never happen. So I think you know where I'm coming from on this, and I don't want to sort of continue to. I would love to see this particular motion withdrawn and potentially discussed at our next meeting, when we've had a little bit more time to go through the actual numbers specific to the HOA and potentially getting some feedback from professional staff on some of the things that you mentioned. And that's my comment.
Okay, so basically a recommendation to either table it or to withdraw it altogether, and have it on the next agenda for with no amount set forth. So that there's been time to review documentation and support. Okay, anybody else? Steve, do you want to give us any additional background as far as how you arrived at your recommended amount? $9,685.39.
Right, so as you'll see in the packets that you received with the agenda, what I did was I used the same 6 months just in the past year. That's just because in the past, we have seen fluctuation with winter months and summer months. So I just tried, just tried to keep everything in the same time frame, just so it balances out better that way. I also ran some numbers containing the whole year. That for the same reason, I didn't choose that because different months you get fluctuation. And then from HOA, it was really referring to 1 month in the future. And in my opinion, it wasn't really enough to base it off of that 1 month. So for that reason, I came with the same 6 months. Same year.
You know, I am kind of wondering, like, we've had requests in the past from homeowners, they fill up a pool or whatever, and they've come to us. For, as soon as the bill comes out, this would be for 2 quarters, right? June, so this is for 2 bills. Am I right? June through November. So that would be for 2 quarters. 3 quarters? Or is it every other month? June, July, August, September, October, November.
It's 6 months, but it's actually 3 quarters, just the way our bill
Wait,
happens.
okay.
You had June being in quarter 1, July, August, September, October, November being in that's how you broke up.
And why are we getting a request for 3 quarters at this stage? And why not after the first quarter of the leak? Were you given any indication as to that, Steve?
Well, there were, like Mr. Young said, there were separate leaks going on. So I didn't base it off of when the first one was fixed because there were some that were fixed after that.
Okay, so it was additional leaking that took place afterwards. Gotcha. Okay. I mean, I do kind of have a problem that way too. I mean, I would prefer that these be brought to us if we're going to deal with them as soon as the bill comes out, so that they be dealt with on a quarterly basis at a minimum. I mean, it just doesn't seem right. I mean, I don't think if a homeowner came to us with 3 quarters worth of bills, that we would be looking very favorably on that. So. Okay, well, why don't we take a vote? And then if the vote does not pass, then we can consider the tabling for the next time. Does that make sense from a,
You have a motion, Pen.
yeah,
You either need to. Or a vote and have the motion defeated and then a motion to table.
so in other words.
Well, actually, you don't,
The
once it's
motion-
defeated, I'm sorry, it's either a motion to withdraw. Or once the motion's defeated, you don't really need to table. You could just give us an indication that you'd like to see it on the next meeting's
Yeah,
agenda.
I don't have a problem voting for it, but I also don't have a problem just, taking another motion if you want.
I would move to withdraw the
Okay,
motion that's on the
I
table.
would
Just-
second
I
that.
agree.
okay, we have a
So-
second.
So you should have a motion to withdraw from Lou. You should have a second. and
A second
vote
from-
on-
a second from Tom.
And a vote, call a vote
All
on
right.
withdrawing.
Let's vote on that. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, the item has been withdrawn from the agenda. And I mean, preliminarily, I can let you know, we'd like to have it back on the agenda for next time. Okay, without an amount in there. Okay. All right,
But just so you guys have a clear explanation procedurally, once there's a motion and a second, that motion belongs to the table. It doesn't belong to the person who made it anymore. That's why you need a vote to withdraw. As opposed to just someone saying,
thank you for that explanation. Okay, next is 12.2. Consider accepting a late second meter reading from Joe Bernacci at 303 Green Bank Lane. Steve, could you just give us a little summary of this one? Or are you prepared to do that?
Yeah, my understanding, I believe we've included in your packet.
Yep.
Some information that, particularly since they were emails, we didn't post them publicly because they had email addresses on them. But basically, the request was very similar to the gentleman who spoke earlier. They missed turning in their meter reading and wanted to be able to turn it in late and get the credit. I did review with Maria the document that they sign and that they're to turn in each time. There were a couple things that we felt that probably needed to be moved around on that document. I know Steve's already started working on it. Hopefully we'll have it in a place that we can have it reviewed by our solicitor. It actually talks about on the document of when they need to have their readings in by. The 5th of these, I believe it's January, every 3 months type of thing. However, they signed above that part on the document. And so that doesn't necessarily mean it's not valid. It just means there may be some confusion in an argument. But
Could you
that's
just explain exactly what the procedure is that they go through?
so what the procedure, yeah, I can hopefully do that. So a person comes in, they turn in a meter, they request the meter, second meter be installed. The second meter, they have it installed at their cost with a plumber. Once it's installed, then they're given the form that they have to fill out each time. They're to take a picture of the meter reading so that we can see the meter reading. They take that picture, they send it to us. We turn around and manually load that into the system for each second meter. And when we first started doing this, I believe there were 10. I think we're now up to over 100. So it's becoming, to be honest with you, very time consuming. And actually, one of the things I'll be talking to you about fees in your budget may be that for second meters, we might auto have a fee to cover the reading.
And this second meter is so that we can net the aqua provided consumption.
So aqua provided consumption coming in the house gives all water readings. What we do is, and we work with our engineer to go out and make sure that when this second meter is installed, it's on plumbing that goes either outside or for the purpose of a pool or something like that, that would not be going down into our system, because that's the key, that we want to make sure that happens. And so when we get that meter, we deduct that from, whatever the meter reading was 3 months ago to whatever the meter reading is this time. You have 1,000 gallons, we deduct 1,000 gallons from whatever the aqua meter reading is, and that's how we do that.
And that's done on a quarterly basis.
That is done on a quarterly basis. So typically a homeowner or a community, a business or whatever gets a bill every month from Aqua. We actually go to Aqua and we request the last quarter's worth of readings, and it's a total number. We don't really get a meter reading from Aqua. If you use 10,000 gallons this month and 12,000 gallons the next month and 10,000 gallons, we get 32,000 gallons. That's what we get told. And then that's what we bill accordingly. And so it's done on the quarter, and it's from their readings that they do. And if I can just take another moment, just to kind of, because I know we have a new board member, we actually require a certain type of meter that is potentially to be read by Aqua, because we keep hoping that if we get a large enough number, we would have to have Aqua be able to do this reading, or it might become financially feasible for us to actually invest in the equipment. I mean, it would need way more than 100. It's very expensive, but it may be that we could hire a third party to actually do these meter readings eventually at some point, and it no longer be this kind of setup. But until we can do that, they're required to submit it. I believe it's by the 5th of the month, so that we can have time to process it. And it's taking longer because there's more of them. And as we continue to build out on this side of the township, we're finding even more being put in as part of that.
Thank you.
Okay, and did you want to, did he finish your question, Louis, about, okay, the process and everything? Okay. All right, so regarding this particular case, it was a late submission of the second reader meeting for this Joseph Bernacci. Okay. And that was for 1 quarter.
I believe it was 1 quarter. Yes, it's 1 quarter. We've
Okay.
confirmed it.
And what amount is at stake?
Did you not get that?
Because that isn't in the email amount.
All right, we would need to get that for you.
All right, why don't we
I'll-
table this one as well for next?
Okay,
So when the meter isn't read, they just bill for the entire amount of water that comes into the house.
absolutely.
Whatever
Just
then
like,
to go through.
just like you, if you happen to be out watering your grass and you don't have a second meter, you would get filled the entire amount of water that came
So
in
he's
your.
asking to be refunded for the water that didn't go through the sewage system. Is that correct?
So
I'm
we-
sorry,
He's asking for a refund of the water that didn't go down into the sewage system.
Based on his
he's
late-
asked, yes, for.
That's right.
And he
Yeah,
wasn't home,
Yeah.
so shouldn't it be a
He's-
small amount?
Yeah, I don't know.
well,
No.
it depends, and it kind of depends on whether, I mean, like, he probably wasn't gone the whole quarter. He
Okay.
probably was gone, in the case of the gentleman that was here, he was in Alaska, maybe he was gone for 2 weeks or something like that.
Okay.
But he may have an irrigation system on his house that's set on a timer that goes off whether he's home or
And
not.
then he's getting billed for that.
And he's
even though
getting
it's-
billed for that
Yeah.
water
Okay.
and would be. So I mean, I don't know that whole situation. I suspect, and if it's fair to say, my guess is all 3 of these, we probably don't have the dollar amount.
don't.
And if we don't,
And
then I
if
think
look
we
at
should
the
get that for you.
timeframes, yes, so dollar amounts requested as well as the time period at issue.
Yeah.
Okay, want to make
Yeah,
sure
just
we want
Should
to
the
order.
table as a slate?
Yep, I think we
Yes,
want to
well,
just table
it's-
the whole.
Yeah, so we'll table all 3 of
All 3 of
these. Is it 4-2? Is that one, that's a late penalty, that's separate.
But yeah, I don't think we have the dollar amount for that one.
Okay,
either.
so let's table that one as well. Dedicate, and then we got 12.5 we'll deal with.
So
We're gonna
do we need
table,
to move?
I think you should move to table.
So I would make a motion to table agenda items 12.2, 12.3, and 12.4.
Second.
all those in, well, I'll make the comment that we'll table them. Provided that we have a dollar figure on each amount and the time frames at issue.
Good point.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, moving on to 12.5, consider approving the dedication of sewer lines on the Ellis Preserve property. I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Okay, now questions or comments? I think, Tom, you're looking for some explanation on this.
Yeah.
I think that our engineer Dave Porter can speak to this.
Okay, so this kind of goes back to what I had contained in my engineer's report with regard to Ellis Preserve and the various components of development that are kind of wrapping up out there. The last portion of that development is known as Ellis Preserve Town Center, Sector 1, Phase 2. And within Phase 2, there's 5 subsections, A, B, C, D, and E. A, B, and C were essentially the first portion of that town center that constructed the last apartment building and a number of townhouses that are surrounding that apartment building. That's the Sector 1, Phase 2 retail or residential.
Yeah.
That had adequate sewage capacity out of the 185,000 gallons a day that were allocated through Act 537 planning. There was a residual amount of about 12,000 gallons remaining. Phase 2D and a portion of Phase 2E contained a proposed office building and a proposed assembly/catering hall. And the developer has asked for a sewage exemption, which from the DEP standpoint, they're saying, okay, we have capacity. We already have the planning in place for this. We don't have to go through a planning module process. And the DEP, if they check all those boxes, will grant them that exemption request to not have to go through planning. The DEP has agreed that they will grant that exemption provided that the applicant documents that the authority has accepted dedication of the sanitary sewer lines to service that development. Prior to this Sector 1 Phase 2 portion of Ellis Preserve, there was various other projects that gained either exemptions or sewage facilities planning approval. One being the AmeriHealth, which was formerly known as the front lawn office building that's constructed. They had about 35,000 gallons a day of flow allocated to that project. I'm not sure whether that building is fully leased or occupied at this point, but the sewer system is in place. It's been constructed, inspected. I actually just received as-built plans from their engineer while we were in executive session this evening. So that said, it looks like we have the documents in place. Whether everything is acceptable from an as-built, plan standpoint, and the sanitary sewer easements and everything are on those plans, the authority would be in a position to accept dedication of that sanitary sewer through that portion of the CDCA system. Next to that was, I think we talked about the residential component. So that residential component is constructed. That's sanitary sewer, has been tested, inspected. We have yet to receive the as-built plans, but we did receive a plan with a deed of easement and legal descriptions for the sanitary sewer through that component. And Phase 2D and E sort of sits between those two developments. So the AmeriHealth would discharge in through Phase 2D and E, and that would be conveyed through Phase 2A, B, and C, and that would end up at the Ellis pump station. So that's why the DEP is looking to the authority for accepting dedication of those sanitary sewers. If a private entity were to own, operate, and maintain that sanitary sewer system, there's a very lengthy process that has to be followed, that the DEP may not even grant that sewage planning approval if they're not satisfied. So ultimately, the responsibility goes back onto the authority anyway, even if it's a private owner. It either goes back to the municipal authority or the township to provide for adequate sewage disposal throughout the municipal boundary anyway. So regardless if, they wanted to push, or the authority or township wanted to push that off onto a private entity, the DEP tends to frown on that for that reason. They're not trusted. They know the township and the authority aren't going to go anywhere. They're going to be there for theoretically in perpetuity. So that's the reasoning behind that. And that's sort of what has kind of held that process up, was the capacity issue, the ownership of the lines issue. And that kind of brings us to where we are now. And Mike can speak to the legal documents that have been provided for review and approval, to the extent that they're acceptable in form and substance to the authority. From a technical standpoint, I'm still receiving some documents that are part and parcel of those agreements and the acceptance of the dedication. But, typically when I'm satisfied, I write a letter to the authority to say that, it's acceptable to the authority if they're so inclined to accept dedication to be appropriate at this time.
Yeah, so the only thing I'd say is I think it would be best if your motion had a small amendment, so it was contingent upon the approval of, I guess it could be any of us, although I'd prefer Steve or Dave because I'm the one they call. And then I could say, Porter, he hasn't signed off yet, makes it easier for me. When Greg Edelman and Andy Riley called me, but
welcome,
somebody, because we have a couple little boxes we need to check.
Yeah,
Sort of, I don't want to say ticky tack things because they're important, but I've approved the form of easement, but we still need the legal descriptions attached to, just administrative type stuff almost, I think.
And
And of
Dave-
course,
and
Dave needs a chance to review the as-bills that he got, that's all.
right, and Dave, you're gonna make sure that the legal aspect of it is done before you give it any form of a sign off.
We work together pretty well. Yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna amend my motion, which is pending, but just amend it to make it subject to the approval of our engineer, Dave Porter of
A
Mcombie
wise
Engineering.
municipal lawyer once told me that after 8 o'clock, you can accept friendly amendments. and stuff
Good.
like that.
Good. All right, so with the motion as amended,
Second.
that's been seconded, all those in
Agree.
favor?
Aye.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And moving on to old business.
Madam Chair, before you do that, I think it would be appropriate to go on record related to the executive session that you had prior to the meeting. I don't think we
Absolutely.
actually put that on record because of the way we started the meeting.
Yeah,
So
because
if
it
you
was
would mind
reappointed.
bringing that onto the record, please.
Yes, for the record, prior to this meeting tonight, we had an executive session of the board to discuss litigation matters.
Okay.
All right, and old business, discussion of possible action regarding the 2023 budget update.
Yes. So we've been talking about the budget actually for almost feels like almost a whole year now, because we've been talking about the need to address the issue of the outstanding debt that we have, as well as the fact that we're painfully aware of the fact that we have a whole section of the community that has an aging system. And so what are we doing to be prepared to handle those things? And so we've gone through and kind of gone through the challenge of trying to figure out this concept, because we have broken our system down into 2 sections. And we've worked with the solicitor and said, we can probably bring everything back together, have really one budget, one focus as a municipal authority, saying that we provide service. It really doesn't matter whether your flow goes east or whether your flow goes west or south, however you want to look at it. We have to provide that service no matter where it's from or where it's going. And then the second piece was that the debt is the debt of the whole authority. And then the repairs, whether it be east or west, it is the responsibility of the whole authority, one way or the other. And so we started talking about that, what it would look like, what needed to be done. We went back and said, we felt like the debt probably should be shared based on the number of EDUs, because that's the size, that's the amount that they bought into the system, how many thousands of gallons they're responsible for in a year, kind of thing. And whether they're using it or not, the EDU drives that fixed kind of number that we have. Upon review, I haven't had a chance to run over these numbers with the engineer yet, but I did have a chance to go through and really look at our system. We know, for example, like when we bill Hunter's Run, there's 76 units, right? And so we understand that, even though it's one bill. So our system says it's one customer, but it's actually 76 units. We have that same kind of thing when you look at an apartment building. We have that same kind of thing when we look at some of the other HOAs in the community. And so I went through and I did that, and upon doing so, I came up with about 7,000 EDUs, which was the nice thing about that is it actually drops the cost per EDU down, so that the homeowner who's a single EDU, we could get in somewhere between $55 and $60 a month to start. I mean, not a month to start, a year to start. And we would take that up to about almost $300. I think the last time I met with you, we were talking about starting at about $101, going up to $505. So this is by going going to the EDU basis, I think we're in good shape. I just need to make sure I want to go through with our engineer and go down and make sure that I have the right numbers for each place and do that before we make an official statement. The second thing I started doing, we had talked about this whole thing of looking at, how are we going to pay for all of these things? Example, your 314 Summit project that went very well. That was a little over $100,000. We talked about the very short replacement that we need to do on Westchester Pike. Even that, I forget exactly how far that was, but it was less than 100 feet, right? 300 feet, 350 feet, 350 feet, $350,000. It's just like the number just is huge. And when you think about that, we have miles of shoreline that run both on the eastern and the western side of the township. And on the eastern side of the township, some of it's well over 50 years old, some of it's over 80 years old. And then we have some lines even on the western side of the township that are nearing that. When you look at some of the areas like the Heights and things like that, they're pushing that 50-year mark. So I started looking at that number and saying, if we just did double, like we had talked about doing, going from $5 a quarter to $10 a quarter, we get somewhere. If we do it by EDU, we get somewhere around $200,000, I think it's $250,000 for the infrastructure fee, or $280,000. I did some quick numbers. That's not even going to begin to have but a drop in the bucket of what we're going to need on a yearly basis to really start doing this. It's a start, but to start really doing what we need to do. So I started making some projections of like, what happens if we double it this year? And then and that's really taking from $5 a quarter or $20 a year to take it to 40. The next year do 60, the next year do 80, and go up to 120. And if we were to go up to 120 and then we take that out over the same period of time in which we have the bond dollars, it works out about $21 million. I think we could spend that easily over that 20-year period. We wouldn't even have to blink an eye, and we would spend $21 million. So for your budget that I'm going to present to you, we're not going to vote on it tonight, but I want to make sure I have your direction for your budget that we're looking at for next year. I would be looking at doing a debt service fee that we had talked about as the finance committee, really, like I said, for the last year. And then the second part being this infrastructure fee. But I think we would want to just go ahead and start communicating that this is a start. This is not the final spot where it's resting, but this is the start. And in both of these cases, we're taking it up a little bit each year over a 5-year period to start to build up the reserves that we need to really take the actions that we need to in our community. And to make sure that
likely to include lending, I would assume.
Excuse me?
Which is likely to include lending.
It's probably going to include lending. One of the challenges we have having a $33 million bond is going back out and adding another amount to that until we start getting some of that paid down. And so that's the biggest thing. And so we got to have several years before we probably go out and do that, a big lending.
What I would add to that is, and it sounds like the curve just keeps sloping up, but when you achieve some stabilization in the average useful life of the components of the sewer system, then that's stabilized. The amount of capital needed or capital assessment needed stabilizes as well. So if we say X 0.5, years of useful life in average for pump stations, once you achieve that sort of stasis, then your revenue can, other than costs going up and things like that, you just don't have to keep ramping it up
as much. And that's very true. And so that's the idea, is to try to get it so that we get up and then we evaluate probably 5 or 6 years in, how is that looking and is it doing? I mean, debt service is clean because there's an endpoint, right? We know we get it paid off, and we can all sit back and relax and say we did our jobs, right? But the but the maintaining of the system and repairing of the system that we have, that's the harder one to project. You know, we've had several years without anything, but we know as we start really ramping up, doing this, these projects where we're going in and cammering lines and doing those kind of things, we're going to find more and more that needs to be done. And we know it's there. We know the numbers. We know we can, you know, if you've looked at the numbers based on the I&I that happens in a rainstorm, it's significant amount of flow ends up in our system. So obviously we have things we have to fix. And so
That's our reverse leak.
that,
Yeah.
yes, exactly. That's our reverse leak. That's exactly right. So working on that, the second piece was that if we combine the two, SR2, even before we combine the two, I kept the two separate initially. Before we combine the two, SR2 was going to be in a negative amount this year anyhow. So we're looking at about an 11% rate increase, where there's a pretty big difference between SR3 and SR2 today. SR2, I believe, is about 9.02 cents, I think is what it is. And SR3 is of 11.32. The idea would be to get them both to the same rough amount. We would do that probably over a couple of years. But this year we have an 11% or 12% gap that we need to fill, and we would take that and do that. So,
And I would add to Mr. Nease's comments that all the expenses of the authority are passed through. There is no reserve that we could sort of balance it out and say, you know what, we'll fund a little bit of the expense increases by using, you know, some accumulated reserve. We don't have that. And in light of our discussion a little bit earlier in this meeting, I would say, and I'm just addressing my four colleagues here at the table, that you know, if we don't have a policy in place with respect to revenue certainty, there may be a fourth component that we have to kick into the budget. I would not be happy about that. But given the fact that we don't really have reserves for revenue reversals or things like that, and we rely on so many different methods of revenue recognition. Absent that, you say another X dollars per EDU or X dollars per household goes towards this fund for us to sort of mitigate out billing errors or billing reversals. You know,
absolutely.
I don't know another way to do that.
The one final thing that I would make note of is, and we talked about this briefly when we were talking about second meter issue, we've increased significantly the number of second meter readings. I think it would be appropriate if the municipal authorities in agreement that when we put the resolution together for the fee piece, which we'll also do at the next meeting for setting all your fees and all of that.
Yeah.
I would, if it's appropriate and the authorities in agreement, I would go ahead and put a fee in, whether it's quarterly or yearly, for if you have a second meter, that there's a cost for us to do that. You're getting a benefit, but we still, it costs us something to produce that every month. And until we can do something where we're having some way to read it electronically, it's very manual, very time consuming from an individual to do that. And so,
Will there be enough time, Steve, to have a new revised policy on that issue for next meeting? Which would include this fee that we could have as part of that?
I think having the fee is not a problem. The policy, I think the form, if you're wanting something more than the form, it may be a little bit slower, but the form itself, I don't have any question about, will be redone. Assuming that Mike and I can go through it and do that, I don't see that as a problem. And then you've given us direction. I believe that we have as your third parties to come up and provide to you some kind of solution related to situations similar to that of Hunter's Run and some of the others that come up. I think we should come back with you kind of an overarching policy that says if you have a leak, here's how you handle leaks. If you have late meter readings, here how you handle late meter readings, and if you have late fees, here's how you handle late fees, is what I'm hearing you say. I think that's what we're gonna come
It
back to you with.
informs the budget process.
It does inform the
Absolutely.
budget process, and I think that we'll come up with a policy, hopefully that you're in a relative agreement with. You may make some changes that we have to go back and work on. So I won't say for sure that'll be in place at the end of the next meeting, but I think you'll at least have had something to review by the next meeting.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just wondering if, so we could have on there maybe separate that fee, because, you know, the fee's going to have to be on that form. The fee's going to have to be in the policy, or maybe it could be as established annually by the.
I think we could have it as established under your fee structure.
Yeah,
Or your fee schedule, which you do on an annual basis anyway.
okay. All right, that sounds good.
So that's kind of where we are with the budget. I'm glad to answer any other questions anybody has.
That was an excellent explanation.
No, that was very good. We appreciate it. All right, moving on then, any other public comment for non-agenda items? Okay, moving on to, hearing none, moving on to items for the next agenda. I think we've established that throughout the meeting, so I don't think we need to belabor that. And unless there's anything else for the good of the order, I adjourn this meeting.
Thank you.